down goes AIPAC, down goes AIPAC. So you might not have noticed from all of the mainstream media celebrations of Francesca Hong losing in Wisconsin, but AIPAC actually got devastated again in elections last night, mainly in Minnesota. So we had Flanagan, who was a progressive candidate and was the lieutenant governor in Minnesota, running for Senate against Angie Craig. Now, Angie Craig was mainly funded by AIPAC, and whenever they lose, the mainstream media, of course, all of a sudden goes radio silent. I said, no, not a big deal, not a big deal, okay? Everybody serve AIPAC, but remember, AIPAC has no power. So how much did she get? Let's take a look. Here's Angie's profile there on Track AIPAC, $710,000. But that race is over, and Flanagan won by a lot, around 20 points. So, and Angie Craig, to her credit, then immediately endorsed Flanagan, so that's good. And Flanagan said this: Craig was only Minnesota Democrat to send 2,000-pound bombs to Netanyahu and has had an incredible amount of support from AIPAC. They've been her biggest funder throughout her entire political career. My values do not align with AIPAC. I'm not taking their money, and I think that this matters when it comes to how we engage in foreign policy. I show you that statement from Peggy Flanagan from before the race was called, because I want you to see what a factor that was in the race. She ran against AIPAC and won super comfortably. And it's a beautiful day in America. And then you see our candidates on the left being smeared by mainstream media 24/7. Oh, they're gonna cancel Thanksgiving and they're gonna release all the prisoners. So for example, did Flanagan run on any of that? No, this is what she ran on.
This election is about a fundamental choice in who our government serves, the many or the money. And right now, too many families are being crushed because it's corporations and billionaires who are calling the shots and leaving working families to foot the bill. It's the child care payment that costs more than your mortgage, a check engine light that forces you to decide which bill can wait, a trip to the doctor that you're putting off, or quietly asking your child to put something back on the shelf because you don't have enough money in your account. All across Minnesota, people are working hard. They're budgeting, sacrificing, taking care of their families, and doing everything right. And yet they're still falling behind. Life shouldn't be this hard, and it doesn't have to be this way. But it is because somebody benefits from it being this way. And it's not you, and it's not me.
So I wanted to show you that because I wanted you guys to see what they're actually running on. They're running on real life issues related to you. They're running against corruption. They're saying, why don't we spend the money at home instead of fighting wars for other nations? And that is why they're winning very comfortably. That is why mainstream media has to throw out 1,000 flares to distract you and try to get you to hate progressives. And look, whether you're on the right or the left, you have to concede mainstream media has attacked every progressive candidate and attacked none of the insiders, the ones that claim to be objective. And one more race in Minnesota that was important, and that's Matt Little's race. So he was trying to replace Angie Craig, so that way we'd get a progressive who beats her in the Senate race, and then her seat in the House would get picked up by a progressive if Little wins. So now we go to drop site news coverage again on that race. In a three-way race, one candidate, Matt Klein, was unapologetically supportive of Israel, while two others, Matt Little and Kayla Berg, have been critics to varying degrees. Given the numbers, the path to victory for Klein was clear. He needed Little to be brought down by boosting Berg, splitting the vote between the two progressives, and needed big money to get himself past both of them. So what did AIPAC do? They not only gave to Klein, but they surreptitiously gave to Berg as well to try to knock out Little. Now we don't know if Berg asked for that money, to be fair to her, but bottom line is AIPAC funded those two. And how did it turn out? Little crushed them. So down goes AIPAC, down goes AIPAC in yet another race. So Sabby, let me bring you in here, because to me, the giant headline from yesterday, and we'll get to Francesca Hong in Wisconsin in a second, but the giant headline should be AIPAC defeated again and no matter how much they spend, they keep losing and losing. But instead, we've got wall-to-wall mainstream media coverage of, the left wing lost. They lost in Wisconsin. They're losers and failures from the objective press. So what do you make of all this?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think that after Thomas Massey's race, I think that AIPAC felt as though they were teaching candidates a lesson that if you are not pro-Israel, we are going to throw every dollar that we have against you, and this will teach you a lesson. But it doesn't seem to be working, and I think this message that is happening right now, more and more people are moving away from this type of lobby interest money. And more people do want our money spent right here at home. And all of this focus that's on Israel, more Americans have moved away from that. But what it goes to show you, these races that we saw today, and of course the ones the week before, is that you can beat the money if you are strategic. You can beat the money if you have an excellent ground game, and that you shouldn't look as though I cannot beat this because they're pouring all this money at you. Now, it does make it more difficult, yes, indeed, but you can beat that money. And ultimately, what I would say to people is that this needs to be studied. People need to look at what those candidates who were able to beat the large dollars against AIPAC, what it was that they did on the ground. What strategy did they use to combat millions of dollars that came into these races?
Yeah, and part of that goes to the statement I'm about to read from Matt Little, which is very similar to what Flanagan said in the video, but I want you to pay attention to each of the policies. He said, we need generational change and strong progressive leaders. You're here on that. If we're bold and brave, we can pass Medicare for all. Now I'll pause there to say that polls at 65%. Universal childcare, that polls, I think, at over 80%. A wealth tax, I think that polls at around 76%. A moratorium on data centers, I think that might poll at over 90%. And we need to overturn Citizens United, that polls at over 90%. And get dark money out of our politics, same 90%. Let's win this thing. If you watch this show for 5 minutes, you know how we feel about systems built to confuse people so someone else can profit. Medicare is the same kind of maze, whether you're on it now or helping a parent through it. And before the comments start, don't you guys want Medicare for all? Why promote a private company? Well, until we get the system we actually want, which is definitely Medicare for all, people still have to survive on the one we've got right now. And most people helping them get paid more to steer them wrong. Same rigged incentive we cover here every day. That's why we work with Chapter, independent Medicare advisors who are honest, not paid to push one plan over another. They're the only Medicare advisors that compare every plan nationwide completely free. Take Chip, a member of our audience. His old broker milked him for commissions. He called Chapter instead, found a better plan, and now saves over $100 a month. And if you're already on the best plan for you, Chapter will tell you straight, no upsell. Get help against the rigged system. Call Chapter for free under 20 minutes at 805-201-2275. That's 805-201-2275. So now, if you turn on cable television or you read the New York Times, did you get a sense that Matt Little and Flanagan and all the progressive candidates have enormously popular issues that they're running on? No. Instead, you got that it's like Thanksgiving. They're gonna take the stuffing right out of your mouth, these monsters, right? So which brings us to how they covered Francesca Hong. So she was running for governor in Wisconsin, and she is to the left of me, and she is DSA. I'm not DSA, and she did have some of these positions earlier, and she, had a late, statements about pulling them back. So look. Part of it could, and she barely lost, just so you know, 39.81 to 39.33 with 98% reporting, good enough to be called. But by the way, that's close enough that you could ask for a recount. And so the Politico asked me, I said, this is kind of a hilarious thing to quote yourself, but she says she got clobbered. I said she got clobbered by national media. And which is unquestionably true, didn't respond as deftly as Abdul and didn't have enough time to build a counter narrative. The negative publicity for the last 2 weeks seems to have taken its toll. Hassan Piker said electability in the primaries and harm reduction in the general still carries lots of boomers when it's paired with a barrage of negative earned media, plus no defensive TV ads. plus no national progressive endorsements. All in all, an unbelievably impressive showing for a DSA Wisconsin ground game. So, and of course, the mainstream media's reaction was the exact opposite. Axios had the headline, "Socialist fever breaks. Take away from Crowley's win." Crowley's the one that defeated Hung. So I'll get to more hysterical reaction in a second, but let me bring Sabby back in. So Sabby, there's a lot of topics here to discuss. One, I could say, hey, listen, I told you guys not to run on these super unpopular positions, like, or not to even have them, like abolishing prisons and defunding police, etc. Right? But I don't do that. I actually think, hey, you know what? We all should have gotten together and said, that's not her main promises at all. She's not even promising that, let alone prioritizing it. She's prioritizing universal child care, etc. And I don't know that I did enough to help her, but I do know that very prominent people like Bernie Sanders and AOC chose not to endorse her, and that created doubt. And that, I mean, just a smidge less doubt, and she probably wins. So I am curious, and I don't know what your take is. So what's your take on all of that?
I did hear from some of the residents in Wisconsin about this race. I put a call out for people to contact me and tell me what they saw happen on the ground. And there's a number of things. The big one, the current governor choosing to basically anoint David Crowley made a big impact on voters. Constantly telling voters that she was not going to be able to win in the general election. Them hearing that over and over and over again, that created doubt. And so they thought that not necessarily so much that all of these people were against her policies, but more so that they really felt as though they were convinced by the current governor that she could not win in the general election. We saw something similar to this in 2020 and 2016 with Bernie Sanders, where I heard people say that on the ground as well. They were convinced by the media that he could not win against Donald Trump. So they voted for Hillary or they voted for Biden. So a similar situation that I heard from people on the ground happened here. You mentioned TV ads. Another one that was brought up to me, I did ask people, did you see any TV ads? Some people reached out to me and they said they saw one or two. Some people said they didn't see any. So what that tells me is that if there were TV ads, they weren't as frequent. Little statistic here for people to understand. When you're talking about a network television, I did look this up. So about 32 to 36% of Americans are watching or subscribe to cable network television. During that time, about 72% of that are ads. So it is very important to have television ads and to show them frequently. I live in Massachusetts. I can't tell you how many I've seen so far for Seth Moulton, who is running against Ed Markey. They're on repeat. So that really does make a big difference, especially for the voters that are over the age of 65. They tend to watch network television, not as much of the streaming platforms or are on social media as much as like a lot of us, right? So that does make a difference. And then ultimately, I think a big part of it is, some people apparently, I was told, were turned off about the comment that she made about Thanksgiving. But I think the big key thing here is when the current governor is anointing one of the candidates and says, this is the person that you should support, well, then it's kind of hard to beat that in a sense.
So Sabby, I want to get into which ones you think are more important, but I don't know your position on these abolishing prisons and defund police, et cetera. So what's your take on that? What's your position on it, and how harmful do you think those policies might be or not?
So I support defunding the police. I've had debates with people on my show about this before in the past, but what has been very clear to me is apparently when I have this conversation with a lot of older voters, they do not support defund the police. They're turned off by it. Garland Nixon and I had a debate about this a long time ago, and he said the fact that you have to explain to me what it really means, that should send a sign to people, right? And I said, well, defund means to defund. It means to remove the funding and to put those funds into community programs. But I have noticed that a lot of older voters are turned off by it. So I think that does turn some voters off. I personally think that she should have, just stuck by what she said. I am starting to see some of these candidates start to backtrack on tweets that they had from years ago. I mean, we have a president in the White House right now that has said insane things and is doing insane things. Nobody's asking him to take back his statements. So this is where I think that these candidates and just Democrat politicians in general, they have to have a little bit more gusto to stand on what they said before and sound like they have some type of conviction, if that makes sense. I know some people are really disappointed about this race in particular, but what I would say to people is that, I see electoral politics as one tool in the toolbox. There are other tools that need to be utilized. And I always encourage people to do, mutual aid, to run these ballot measures. If you live in a ballot initiative state, there are other things that we can do on our end to get some of these policies implemented, at least on the local level. And I have seen that happen in states like mine, like Massachusetts. So I think we should never put all of our hope or energy into a candidate, and we should always look at what we can do as well.
Yeah, so I think that some things are super clear. Like they always have a money advantage, the other side, and that's huge. And anytime you can't overcome their overwhelming money advantage, then media piles on and goes, "Oh, you were not a good enough candidate." We'll come back to the media, but that stuff is relatively clear. We just talked about some of the far left positions, and I'm glad to see that people are coming around to, yeah, it's not electorally helpful. And then we could have debates about if it's the right thing to do or not. But obviously the candidates are withdrawing from them. But I actually do agree with Sabby that whatever you decide to do, you're gonna retract, you're gonna double down, do it strong, right? Don't be too apologetic and say, look, this is what I'm gonna prioritize, this is what I'm gonna run on, and run with strength, even if I don't agree with you. So on whichever issues. So, and look, why do I support Francesca Hung, even though I don't agree with some of those social issues that she's was in favor of? Well, because I don't want to do nothing Democrat and I don't want to do nothing Republican. At least she was going to try to prioritize some of the things we do agree on, whether it was childcare, raising the minimum wage, and all the other progressive policies that are very, very popular. And so before I get to the media, one last thing, Sabby, on the relative importance of these factors. So what's your take on the no endorsements and how much of a difference it made? To be fair, Our Revolution endorsed, Progressive Democrats of America endorsed. Ro Khanna was the only legislator, as far as I know, who endorsed. And it's interesting because Ro Khanna is not as far left as Francesca is. AOC and Bernie kind of are on the social issues, but he chose to endorse to back the progressive, and AOC and Bernie chose not to. And they would say, to be fair to them, they'd say, hey, that's gonna hurt our credibility. And when she loses, they'll say, oh, it's your fault or whatever, right? And we want to preserve that credibility, and we want to win the general election. And hey, if I don't, want to, or I don't like her positions as much as I like others, I don't have to endorse. Sure, of course, everybody's free to do whatever they want. But what was your sense of how much those no endorsements matter?
Seeing how close this race was, I have to question it. I have to question that if they did give her that endorsement, maybe she could have made it just over the finish line. But it does make people question. And I know sometimes they usually don't get involved in like these gubernatorial races. I understand that. But in this race, people are upset, and they feel like it could have made a difference. And maybe it could have, maybe it couldn't have. I'm not 100% sure. But we had this conversation just recently, also with independent candidate Shama Sawant, who wanted an endorsement from DSA. And many of us were like, just give her the endorsement. Like, you agree with her on like 99.9% of the policies. And what I've come to learn, over the years is that politicians and organizations, I guess they have different, criteria that they're looking for. Sometimes they might be afraid to stick their neck out for a candidate if they feel as though they may not make it in the end. I think Bernie and AOC probably were already told she has no chance to win the general election. And then it's like, well, they're gonna have that on their record. But to me, I feel like the principle is more important. Do you support the policies or not? So I think they should have endorsed her.
Yeah, look, if the race was decided by 2 points, 4 points, then it's a little bit more arguable if it made a difference. She lost by 0.4. No, it made a difference. It put doubt into people's heads. And so this is what I call the shortcutting of a candidate. Shortcut Chakrabarti was AOC's chief of staff. He was in comfortable second place, nearly catching up to first, and the top two make it into the runoff in California, running in Nancy Pelosi's old seat. AOC refused to endorse him, and he dropped like a rock. They started running ads, you can't trust him because AOC doesn't trust him. So AOC actively destroyed his chances by not endorsing him. She saw the ads, and she still didn't do it. So I think we got to stop shortcutting our own candidates. Why, this is crazy. And I'm saying this from a person that doesn't agree with Francesca Hong on a lot of the issues, right? And Sabby, I've had those debates internally within the left, right? Hey, don't go in that direction. But when it comes to election time, what are you helping establishment Democrats for? No, I mean, why do we have a Big Tent if you're not gonna stay inside the tent when elections come, right? Then it's kind of pointless. So that's my take on it. But I'm gonna show you one more clip from mainstream media. This is Chris Matthews. They brought him out of retirement to yell at progressives. He's on Morning Joe. Let's watch him real quick.
I like AOC generally, but she came out and said we're just a Big Tent party. Well, the problem with the Big Tent defense is every Democrat has to defend all this crap coming from the left. They've got to say, I believe in all this crazy stuff, and that makes me a Democrat. You've got to say, no, I'm not a member of the DSA, and here's why, and make it very clear. So it's going to require politicians to be good politicians and say, here's where I stand.
Right.
This is what I'm a regular Democrat. I'm for labor unions. I'm for opportunity for everybody. I'm for civil rights. I'm for all the things I believe in as a Democrat, but I'm not with this crowd. And I think that's going to be a line that has to be drawn by Democrats, because I'm telling you, the last 6 weeks of this election is going to be an attack on El Sayed and the DSA in New York and the Mamdani, and it's all going to come out and blame every Democrat for everything the DSA is doing.
I find that segment so ironic, like almost on a meta level, Sabby, because so it's mainstream media and Joe Scarborough and MS Now that are constantly screaming, they're all DSA, they're all socialist, right? And then they come out and go, no, you have to clarify you're not DSA. Okay, but it would help if you didn't say that we're all DSA when we're not. And now like the onus is on us to prove that we're not radicals or something. Well, how about the Republicans? They have like loads and loads of lunatic radicals, but no one ever says Herschel Walker represents the entire Republican Party. And if every single Republican doesn't actively say, I'm not with Herschel Walker, just to pick one of their crazy candidates from the past, then you're all Herschel Walker. So this is only done to progressives. Doesn't it show that mainstream media in reality, let alone being liberal media, which is hilarious, is actually in a lot of ways, including MS Now, our biggest opponents, because they're the ones who smear us the most.
Unfortunately, corporate media, they're the ones that control the narrative, and the Democratic Party, they fight harder against the DSA than they do against Donald Trump. And it's very apparent they want to keep the establishment in place. This is ultimately why some like myself, we have been trying to get behind like independent candidates or third party candidates. And it's very hard because the Democratic Party will, kick off Green Party candidates on the ballot, and the Republican Party will remove libertarian candidates on the ballot sometimes. So that's a battle that they have to deal with. But I think that this is why some of us have said, I wonder, if people like Ilhan and Rashida Tlaib, if they had the opportunity to do so, or if they had the resources to do so, would they have been better off if they had their own political party? I wonder that, and this is why some of us we're calling for more independence to get in there, right? Because these politicians, they still have to answer to Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, and before that Nancy Pelosi, and now you have these commentators that are coming out of retirement, that are coming back on corporate media to say, no, this cannot happen in this party. It's very clear that they want to keep the establishment in place. So that's why many of us wonder, like, would they have been better off if they just would have been independent, or maybe they got in the way that they did and then they became independents, or if they had a separate party. And that's a whole other conversation. And we know that's something that's not easy to do. But this is why more of us have been advocating for independence, people that can kind of break up that duopoly in Congress.
And of course, the mainstream media reaction to that would be, how dare you, you're betraying the Democrats. And that's why you should definitely not vote for Abdul El Said or any of these other progressives in their elections. But wait, which one is it? Is it vote blue no matter who? Or if the establishment corrupt candidate doesn't win, all of a sudden all of the establishment Democrats betray the progressive who was in the race, right? So to be fair, now a lot of the establishment has come back around to Abdul El Said, but that's their inclination and what they've done in every race. So I understand the frustration. And so even if I don't agree that we should break off or right now, for example, will there come a time when if the Democratic Party regains control and just establishes that supremacy for their corporate and corrupt positions? Yeah, of course there's gonna come a time, like Tucker and MTG, et cetera, are doing on the right. At some point, people on the left are gonna go, if you're gonna keep us out of your primaries, you're gonna not give us a fair chance to win these elections, well then you're pushing us out of the party, and there's nothing we can do. I think all of that will come to a head in 2028, and how they handle the presidential primary. I think if they run a fair primary, then maybe the party can stay together. But if they run a super unfair primary where they try to push out progressives again, then we're gonna have massive trouble.
Where the super delegates decide to give a state that one of the candidates won to another candidate. That's the thing. And the Republicans don't have to worry about that because they don't have to deal with like the super delegates. But the reality is, like in the Democratic Party, we watched this happen to Bernie Sanders, right? Like in 2016, Bernie won states like West Virginia, and the super delegates decided that they were gonna give that state to Hillary Clinton. That is the wall that a lot of these progressives end up hitting. And so I ultimately believe that some of these progressive politicians, I think some of the reasons why they're walking back some of their previous statements from like 2020 is because they want to get that approval from the super delegates so that maybe they can break through, right? Like maybe AOC thinks if she does this, maybe she can somewhat break through. But we never really know, but I just know that the super delegates tend to look out for the establishment. And I'm not 100% sure the Democratic Party learned their lesson from 2024. I felt like we were largely ignored. Many of us that were advocating for Gaza, many of us that were saying no more wars, the demands that we had towards Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I feel like we were very much ignored. And I'm not 100% sure that the DNC really cares even now. And so that is rather concerning.
No, I'm pretty sure they don't care. So I don't think they learned any lessons from 2024. In fact, they tried to bury the lessons that they learned through their autopsy. And yeah, the establishment and Nancy Pelosi and television being so friendly to AOC scares me a little bit. Do they know something we don't know? And we are worried about that. But hey guys, don't forget to celebrate by getting your AIPAC Tears mug at shoptyt.com, because last night, don't lose track of the actual headline. We collected a lot of AIPAC Tears. That's at shoptyt.com. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.